Good evening, I am the Friendly Senpai, and today we're going to be talking about Kara no Shojo, which is an erotic visual novel created by Innocent Gray and published to Manga Gamer in 2013. It tells the story of Reiji Tokisaka, a detective-turned-private investigator that is asked by a former co-worker to look into a series of grisly murders that have been cropping up all over Hoya City. As several girls from his sister's private school go missing, only to wind up dead with a severed limb and mysterious black egg replacing their uterus, Reiji is forced to revisit his days as a detective in order to unearth the school's dangerous scandals and catch the killer. As you've probably guessed, this is not like your typical hentai visual novel, which is why I included a little question mark in the title. Kara no Shojo is very story-oriented, so there are only one or two sexy scenes to be had with a very small handful of characters. The rest of the game is focused entirely on Reiji's quest to solve the murder mystery that bears a striking resemblance to the same string of murders that led to his fiance's death. And throughout the game, you learn how every little thing intertwines with one another. Kara no Shojo is kind of like Durarara in the sense where if you miss one tiny detail, you could fuck up the entire case and plummet into one of the pretty horrible bad endings. Meanwhile, Kara no Shojo's plot uses a lot of symbolism, with several of the victims acting as references to Dante's Divine Comedy. And the eggs placed in their wombs represent... well, that's actually kind of a big spoiler. It's a deliciously dark and macabre and convoluted story that touches on several extremely taboo subjects such as child prostitution, incest, necrophilia, and how the iron grip of systemic oppression can break someone's mind or push them into doing the very thing you're trying to shelter them from. There are scenes where we're not just given insight to the murderer's mind, but we're given full scenes where we get to see what's going on through his head as he selects his murder weapon, as he decides what limb he's going to remove, all before he chops through a leg and cuts through a bone, while his victim is very much conscious and aware of her surroundings. And if you think you can just skip through these scenes, you're going to have to sit there during an investigation and drink in the sight of a girl whose face was slit ear to ear, or whose head was completely twisted around with her eyes gouged out. It's gross and stomach-churning in ways that tickles me pink, but it's definitely not for everyone. It also touches base on what it's like to be a Japanese citizen post-World War II, as the game takes place in the 1950s. It's little comments like, the military base nearby makes this part of town unsafe, the characters' brief mentions of their lives during the war, records lost in the destruction that makes it very easy for people to fabricate new lives for themselves, and small tidbits here and there that really give you some insight on what it was like to be someone that was on the side that lost. It's not prevalent by any means, but it gives a little more depth to each of these characters. Adding even more depth was Reiji's interactions with the students and his reactions to their deaths later in the game. In the beginning, it's very clear that Reiji only sees the victims as just that, victims. Sure, he pities them, but there's little to no emotion in his responses. As he builds relationships with these students and comes to know what kind of lives they each have lived, seeing their corpses and hearing the news of their deaths has a significantly bigger impact on him. And he is a goddamn gentleman, by the way. You guys know that I absolutely abhor the treatment of the receiving partner in hentai because, for all intents and purposes, they're really just treated like objects that walk and talk. But Seiji walked these girls home and ensured their safety, regardless of whether or not he was sleeping with them. And if he was sleeping with them, he always made sure they were comfortable and they were enjoying themselves. This shouldn't be a revolutionary concept for hentai, but it feels like it is. Though I'm not gonna lie, the sex was totally shoehorned and did not need to be there. Really though, everything about this game appeals to my interests, except for one thing. This game is so fucking long. There are, I believe, a total of 5 endings you can receive based on how you play the game. However, I do want to stress that you can't necessarily change the game's story by making different decisions like you can with other visual novels. You can change the way you experience the story by playing it differently and focusing on different characters, but if you don't play the game the right way, you essentially get a game over, which is a bad ending, and it's like super gross. what? So rather than changing the story, you just kind of get a little further along each time with different outcomes until you get the true ending. Until then, you better get your ass comfortable. I was expecting this to be maybe 20 hours, but it took me something like 40 to 50 hours to get this game completed. This may largely be due to the fact that I had to force myself to binge through the game in order to get the review out in a timely manner, but it honestly did feel a little exhausting. Especially when the game was trying to keep you constantly on your toes with all of these speculations and twists that came around every corner. Everything about the game's aesthetics matches up with the story. It carries a cool neutral color palette with little more than splashes of red that fit in perfectly with a story that's shrouded in mystery and murder, and a smooth, almost painting-like style that pairs with the heavy artistic and literary themes. The art provides a constant ambience to the game, a lingering sense of dread and helplessness as you come to understand that you cannot save everyone. It's dark and it's dreary, but it's not dull. No matter where you look, there is a tiny, minute detail that, while easily overlooked, is something that would be sorely missed. This can be anything from the minute textures in the canvas that Toko is painting on in the schoolyard, or the subtle outlines of the tiles in Natsume's autopsy room, or the slightly askew books in Moonworld. There's always something to discover in every scene if you just take the time to look and appreciate what has been created for us. And the character designs are pretty doggone realistic, so that's a plus. I mean, there are some artistic liberties taken for some characters, but I just want to take a moment to commend the character artists for creating realistic Japanese high school students. They have natural black hair, hemlines that, albeit a little short, are modest, and normal body proportions with no exaggerated waist to bust ratios. Of course, the adult women completely obliterate all of that. I mean, look at damn boobies. Damn. And this is actually the one thing about the art that really bothers me. So Nene is supposed to be the school nurse in an all-girls school that is super strict, right? Everyone acts like a robot. Teachers cannot interact with students. Students are prohibited from talking to any boys under any circumstances. And it's hella Catholic. In the 50s. You mean to tell me that Nurse Breasticles is allowed to run around with that plunging neckline? No. Fuck you! If you're striving for historical accuracy, then strive for historical accuracy! But still, back to the anatomical correctness, can we give the artist a round of applause for creating the boobs and vaginas? Because they did a ridiculously good job. The breasts actually came in different shapes, and those shapes were realistic, like the ones you'd see on a real 3D girl, if y'all remember what those are. And the vaginas? I shouldn't be this excited for how well designed a vagina is, but it's so rare for genitals to be anatomically correct in the first place, never mind this anatomically correct. I was so impressed. They even had hair. I wish I could show you, but that's a really good way to get banned from YouTube. On top of having excellent writing and quite stellar art, this game had some pretty bomb-tastic gameplay. So if you've ever played Ace Attorney, this plays like an advanced version of that. If you haven't played Ace Attorney, let me explain. So you travel to various crime scenes as an investigator that is assisting the police. While you are at these crime scenes, you have the option to click on some sections which will provide you with evidence that you can later use to unlock more secrets and eventually unravel the mystery that is Kara no Shojo. You have to make sure you are clicking everything more than once though. And don't be afraid to click on the same thing but in slightly different places. While the first click will give you a general observation, a second or third click will show you something that was initially missed and will greatly help the investigation. This can be anything from paying note to how an incision in a girl's back looks akin to a teardrop, to discovering a scrap of paper that is stuck in Toko's uniform. And you really have to pay attention to the pointer because when it flickers, that's when it's telling you that you have moved on to something else that can be observed as a separate entity. There's one scene that really killed me though, and that's the scene where you're in the white room where you were expected to find a postcard between some books. I could not figure out where the hell I was supposed to be clicking, but I knew I was missing a piece of evidence. So I had to mash the scene over and over and over, just dragging my mouse around until I finally found it. However, What is even more underhanded than cleverly hidden items is the knowledge that some scenes actually have a cap on how many times you can click around before it takes you out of the investigation. This is likely to keep players from getting stuck for too long, but this will affect what kind of ending you get. If you don't have everything you need to incriminate a character, the game will not let you. It will give you a different ending, and those endings are usually bad. The same goes for how Reiji spends his off time. Nearly every single day over the course of 2 months, you will choose where Reiji travels when he's not working undercover at the academy. How often you travel to these places and in what order will also directly affect your ending. Every little decision you make in this game will directly impact your gameplay, so be sure to choose everything very wisely for like your first 2 playthroughs. If you feel like championing this title, you can't get around it. You will have to use a walkthrough, which is something that I feel was a failure on the developer's end. If you have created a game that is so ungodly difficult that it is nigh impossible to complete it without the use of a walkthrough, you took your concept too far and the end product suffered for it. TLDR, obviously, I really loved Kara no Shoujo, and I'm actually kind of excited to play the sequel, which is already out. It had its faults, but overall, I feel like it was a fantastic game. The story was excellent, the gameplay was absolutely intensive, it is fully voice acted with stellar actors, there is replay value for literally days. And the soundtrack pulled everything together just like it should by sealing in whatever aura that the scene was trying to deliver. If you do use a walkthrough, I highly suggest you only use it to figure out where you need to travel to and where you need to click in an investigation. Anything else will remove you from the story, and that would be an absolute travesty. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Kara no Shoujo. If you have played it, let me know in the comments below which ending you got until you realized what your dumbass was doing to keep getting you killed. If you didn't play it, I will have a link in the description below where you can buy it from mangagamer.com. Otherwise, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon in the description as well. Happy unbirthday, and remember that Senpai loves you. Bye!